Roger, good morning.
Hello, hello.
Let's say we talk about whether your infrastructure is secure, three things you can do right now to improve your security posture randomly.
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's do it. So let's move on here. Oh, by the way, we'll go over you. My name's John. I'm here because I've been really fortunate in my life. I've worked for credit unions for 25 years. Undoubtedly, I've gotten opportunities I would not get if I was in any other industry. And I believe everybody should have a credit union account. They'd be better off. And we're here, to try to help you guys. Our whole goal is to, with these webinars, honestly, we don't really sell any security services. We're here, and Roger really doesn't. You can try to talk him into it. I know before it does some things, he'll go over it in a minute, but for the most part, we just want to educate and try to make it better for everybody. So I'm excited to talk to you about this, and it's going to be a fun conversation. It always is with Roger. Speaking of Roger, let's introduce him. Roger, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I've been doing computer security for 34 years, earned all of these gray hairs. I've worked for a lot of different companies and trying to fight hackers and malware and all that sort of stuff. I've written 12 books, over 1,100 magazine articles, and I was also the InfoWorld and CSO weekly security columnist for about 15 years. And but my life's goal is to make the internet a significantly safer place for people to be.
And I have to say, one of my cool stories is Roger wrote a number of books on becoming an MCSE. And Microsoft certifications in the years past, and I can honestly say that I used those and improved my my employment status as well as improved my knowledge. And so it was an honor to meet him when I finally ran into him. So, all right, well, clearly the pedigree is here, and as I've mentioned, I've been in credit unions for 25 years, dealt with a lot of security issues, and so we were talking, and we thought, there's some things we need to go over, and I love Roger's pitch on this. So let's go to the next slide. So when I think of the folks who are sitting at home, and I've talked to a lot of my CEO friends, Roger, and I say, hey, what keeps you up at night? And security is the number one thing. That's the one that keeps him up at night. And I know I was talking to my friend Ty at Visions, and he says, yeah, I just picture like they're dressed as ninjas, they're in their basement. And they spend all day, every day trying to break into my credit union. So what specific things though? The problem is these days, Roger, there's so much to I mean, just look at this list. I mean, it's massive. What are you going to do against, you're going to battle China for state-sponsored attacks, credential theft? And so when I was talking to Roger, I said, there's got to be some order of operations, some prioritization around this. And of course, Roger's done a lot with that, and I'll let him speak to that. So let's highlight those areas. So when I said, Roger, here's my list, what do you think? And here was the area that he really said, look, these are things that are upcoming that we should keep an eye on. And maybe you could speak to that, Roger. Go ahead.
Yeah, so these are certainly big deals. They're increasing. You see different types of crime ebb and flow over the years. Like when I got back into it, or when I was first into it in 1986, 87, it was Apple viruses and DOS viruses. And we had to tell people, make sure, and DOS boot viruses, make sure you pop out your floppy disk, right? And then in the 90s, it was email spam worms and email worms where, one person would click on the wrong email and all of a sudden your whole email network was taken down and your day was spent trying to get rid of the I love you worm or something like that. So this is what I would say, and this is important here. These are things you should be worried about, but most of these, with the exception really of the employee errors, are really outcomes of your real problems. And what I mean by that is your problem is not ransomware per se, as an example. It's how the ransomware got in. If you're not fixing the root cause of how these things are occurring, like if a nation state sponsored attack gets into your environment, there is a reason, a way that it got into your environment. If ransomware gets into your environment, there is a reason, a way. If your credentials get stolen, there is a reason why that occurred. So that's really what most organizations need to do better, is focus on the root causes. And there are only, and this is good or bad, there are only a couple of root causes that have been responsible for the vast majority of attacks for the entirety of computers. And so it's easier to focus on if you close a single root cause, you stop everything, whether it's hackers or malware or whatever, no matter what their intent is, from doing it.
And so I said, okay, I get it. It's blocking and tackling. We got to be good at that. We got to, but these are things that you said, hey, these are the outcomes that lately I've been seeing. So let's go to the next slide. So I said, okay, well, here's all the things that I hear a lot of people tell me. By the way, this fifth domain is the coolest. Have you heard about it's quantum, but it's the fifth property, I believe.
Oh yeah, the fifth force, the
fifth force. Yeah, that's another good name. All good band names. I've already got them and I own the website. But yeah, the fifth force. That's a whole nother webinar. We could talk about muons, and Harry actually wrote. We'll get into that. But okay, so the first one that was out there was, oh hey, I'm hearing everybody say you got to upgrade your firewalls. You're going to need newer firewalls that are all AI and they're Skynet and they're prescient and they're like Terminators and they just track down the actual hackers and shoot them in the past or in the future or whatever. And your first thought, go ahead and speak to that.
Well, yeah. So I don't think true AI is there yet. And let me say that ultimately, I think that within a decade, IT security is going to be good bots fighting against bad bots. Like it's literally going to be the self-detection, self-healing networks attacked by bad bots, and you're going to have algos, the algorithm makers on both sides trying to defeat the other guy. So I think eventually AI is going to play a very important role. But AI is right now, a lot of the best AI experts I talk to say we really don't have AI. It's really more rules-based. And let me say that every time I hear a new advanced firewall, like I've been hearing next generation firewall for 2 decades, and I keep saying, when's that next generation firewall going to save me? So every time, and now I'm hearing next generation EDR, endpoint detection response software. And it kind of flies into the face that something like 85 to 95% of the people that have been infected by ransomware, and the average time ransomware is dwelling undetected is 200 days plus. Most of those people had up-to-date firewalls, up-to-date antivirus, and all the normal stuff you would normally think that you have. 85 to 95% of the people had those things in place and still got compromised. And I don't see a more intelligent thing in the next couple of years providing that sort of intelligence that's really going to be a game changer. But I think eventually that's really where it's all going to end up. I just don't think it's in the next 2 or 3 years.
So if I'm reading between the lines, it's kind of like my approach to platform. People are like, oh, you're all Windows or you're all Linux. And my answer to that is it's all the same. It's a matter of your expertise, right? You would take the hardened rules-based firewall that someone's monitoring, understands, and knows what's going on, than the brand new fancy AI that's got to learn, and you may not have configured properly because the other ones had years in it. And that transition is going to be important, and maybe just not yet. You haven't quite seen what you as one of the premier security folks in the world would say, yeah, I haven't seen the results of that. So let's move on to number 2. So this was mine. I'm like, well, hey, Roger, I'll fix you. I'll encrypt everything. Haha. Then what are you going to do? And your answer was?
Encryption really doesn't save people that much. Most attacks are client-side attacks where the people that are accessing the data have the needed access to get to it. And so attackers are just in that person's context and can steal that data. And let me say that encryption that encapsulates data and is harder to steal, that's maybe an offset. It's just not used enough. But my favorite thing is I've yet to hear a person tell me, thank God my data was encrypted so it wasn't compromised, or I should have encrypted my data and it would have been stolen, or someone saying, the whole reason I got compromised is I was running TLS version 1.2, and they told me that I shouldn't have been using TLS version 1.2 for like years now, and I can't believe I didn't get to TLS version 1.3. Or years ago, Bruce Schneier said, if you get compromised because of SSL, you're doing a whole lot better than literally everybody else.
Because if they're down to that level, that's all you got left. Okay. So then I said, aha, I got you now, Roger. Everybody's moving to the cloud. And the next 2, people aren't doing a good job. They're just throwing stuff up in the cloud and they're not watching cloud security. And you said,
That I don't know anybody that's been compromised because of a cloud only type security issue. There's not been any cloud only malware. There are vulnerabilities announced in different clouds time to time, but the vast majority of attacks that have happened in clouds today have been unpatched software and social engineering and bad permissions. Like where someone puts up an AWS cloud storage bucket and they say everyone can read,
But
and
yeah,
that's
like Capital One, right? They were on AWS, but that was because of an employee.
yeah. So it's very, very common. As a matter of fact, I think I'm starting to like cloud products more because if they need to be patched, the cloud vendor does it and no one knows. It just happens. And if there's a problem, it gets fixed right away. Even like the recent Microsoft Exchange Online 0 days, they didn't impact the O365 infrastructure at all. And if they did, Microsoft could have fixed it versus what happened in the on-premises world, which is where it took Microsoft had to work in secret for months, and then the patch leaked out ahead of time, and then all the ransomware people took advantage of it, and you end up with hundreds of thousands. I just heard a guy the other day, a friend of mine that had his environment compromised. He's like, yeah, they came through the Exchange server. Can you believe it? And I'm like, where have you been for the last month?
Yeah, that's like the number one vector. Yeah,
but
especially
sometimes
it's
you don't
TLS
hear about
1.1 versus or 1.2 versus 1.3. No, I'm just kidding. So cloud's not it. Then I said, okay, Roger, you can't refute this one. You got to patch everything. That's really important.
Hugely important.
You said that was it.
Yeah. That's unpatched software has been the number one or number two way that reason why people get compromised for the entirety of computers. For a long, long time, it was number one, but then it became number two in like 2009. But it's still responsible for somewhere between 20 to 40% of all successful attacks. And let me say, what's amazing is everybody knows you need to patch software, right? Everybody knows that. Yet it is still so difficult that almost no organization can promise you that they're actually very patched. I'm
going to play the devil's advocate, but Roger, we had the automatic patching on, and our whole home banking went down. And we had to reverse out 2 patches, and it was some sort of framework 2.5 update and who's ever going to, that patch wouldn't even have affected us. But it did blow up everything. And Roger, we cried. We got together and we cried. It was sad. We had to have therapy afterwards, and we turned that crap off. So what do you say to that? I mean, it's a legit issue.
Yeah, anywhere where I ever went and did a security review where they turned off auto patching, their patching status was far worse than you could ever imagine. Far worse than the people that have made the argument to turn it off. It was always like just really bad. But on top of that, if you look at the biggest compromises, if they weren't social engineering, they were unpatched software most of the time. And I'm talking about billions of records. There are things where they didn't patch, and let me say, when they didn't patch, they typically didn't patch for many months to years. We're not talking 0 days or near 0 days. We're talking about patches in many cases have been out months to almost a year in most cases.
Yeah, and my answer to the question I just posed too is, you should have automatic patching turned on in dev and in test with a short follow-up behind. If it breaks dev, okay, figure it out, and then still patch everything else. And that was the mode. But I find that that's another issue is that, even having the proper environments, which kind of brings us to the next one, which is I said, well, okay, we got to have a recovery plan. I've got to have we got a game plan. We got to table game this like it's war games, like it's Risk. When I was a kid, I used to play Risk in Germany with a bunch of Germans. You haven't lived until you've played Risk with a group of German engineers and family. They would take Polaroids of the board before they left to make sure that nobody touched it. They were, I've never seen anybody so serious about world domination. Weird. But you said, you can plan all day. You gave me the Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, and let me say that I think that my overall issue is that everybody, today it's assumed breach. Everybody's assumed breach, assume that you usually could be breached, or you're already breached, and you have to have those sorts of psyche and controls and mitigations for that. And that's a good thing because that is true. I just think people aren't trying hard enough on prevent breach.
Yeah.
It's because we've done such a poor job preventing breach that we have to assume breach. And so that's why I actually think recovery plan, you have to have it. You have to have incident response and data, recovery and all that sort of stuff. I just think that I would always put, let's prevent. first.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And people
So
are like,
one of my,
well, let me say, and people are like, oh, we have that. We don't. We do not concentrate on it enough. Yeah, a matter of fact, I think I heard this from you. Where someone said, okay, how do you defend against ransomware? A data backup. That's mitigation after it's in.
yeah,
Like
you
that
haven't
is not
defended.
preventative.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I tell the story of I get this one a lot. Like people are having some sort of trouble or something's down and they're like, we're being hacked. I'm like, nope, that's not their purpose. If the last thing they're going to do is pull the fire alarm. It's when things go too well. I like to tell the story of the TJ Maxx guys that were actually fixing jobs on the mainframe in the AS400 in the job control language so that nobody would go over there and take a look. They were actually solving problems for the operational staff. It'd be like if your core had a problem and suddenly and magically it gets fixed, be suspicious. All right, so then I said, okay, you got to go with this one. What about all the people who are like, they're working from home now, Roger? They're accessing from their nasty, dirty home networks with open Wi-Fi. My favorite one, my neighbor's got their Wi-Fi set to FBI surveillance van. That's what his SSID is. And I got no clue how their networks are set up. And all of a sudden, thanks to COVID, there's a million people accessing from places that they never accessed before that maybe were secure or weren't secure. And you said?
Well, I think it's a good idea to make sure you're trying to come from a safe place, but I don't think it provides as much security as people think, because the vast majority of hacking is client-side compromises where a person is compromised on their desktop or laptop, and they just wait for you to connect to the secure VPN and go through it that way. But certainly, there are many stories where people came on a really crappy networks that are man in the middle and stuff like that, and it's not going to be a good thing.
Right. And many times we've tracked, people, especially in Europe and in old Eastern Bloc countries, go to some internet cafe and that's the end. But that's a normal one. Okay.
Interesting note real quick is that Google, and I just came across some other research here, they were trying to find out digital certificates. In the Google Chrome browser, you don't get to see as much of the digital certificate details as you used to be. And the reason why is they learned the more details they gave people and the more knowledgeable somebody was in digital certificate security, the more likely they were to then get compromised by a real digital certificate exploit. So the more intelligent the person was, they would go, oh, I see this, and that's because they forgot to register this certificate for this right domain. How stupid! Right. Not realizing they were now injecting themselves into a real true man in the middle attack.
Yeah, and Chrome is more and more trying to obscure that stuff. So okay, updating security. So how's that different than number 5? So what I said was, hey, this is like is you're creating part of InfraGard. Are you part of something like KnowBe4, your company, where you're getting the latest threats, where your group understands what's out there? And you said,
well, I think it's a good thing. Education, security awareness training, that's what my company does. But let me say that one of the best things you can do as a defender is pay attention to trends. There is a point where ransomware was kind of being every malware hacker attack paradigm
starts somewhere.
Goes through this thing where it's noise, and then you start to hear about it a little bit more, and then maybe there's an outbreak in your company, and then, oh my God, it's everywhere. And that could be before ransomware, it was pass the hash attacks. Before that, it was email worms. Before that, it was DOS boot viruses or whatever. But they all go through this natural ebb and flow. And so if you're keeping up to date on the latest, how things are being accomplished by the hackers, like phishing via SMS is becoming more popular and things like that, you can start to adjust your defenses to these growing trends. And the sooner you do that, the less damage you're going to have overall. So that's keeping up with the latest tricks is only going to help you and everybody that you help manage.
All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to just cover the last ones pretty quickly. I want to make sure you touch on Ultra. I said increasing budgets, and you said adding more people just means, more people to misconfigure something. And are you really adding the right resource? How do you even know what resource if you're not doing the above one? Security systems and protocols. You felt like, yeah, that was back kind of with number 1. We don't need to constantly be adding more and more if you create enough obfuscation and complexity in your network, then you've already caused your own problems in some ways, and you can create even more places. It's like adding a bunch of corners for them to hide in. But then I said multi-factor, and you said
using multi-factor authentication is a great thing to do. Significantly reduces some forms of attacks. Unfortunately, it doesn't prevent, you can't use it on even 2% of the world's websites and services, and it does not prevent hacking. The biggest misconception people have is, oh, I'm using MFA, I'm significantly less likely to be hacked, and that is not true. I wrote a whole book on it. I know lots of companies that switch to MFA, and they're like, hey, we're still hacked, and it's even worse now.
So let's be clear. In our world, there's two kinds of MFA. There's the MFA for the customers for home banking. And then there's the MFA, which is now much more significant if someone's using a VPN or some other way to access the platform remotely. And are you saying on both?
I am a fan of MFA, and I think everybody should use it when and where they can. The only caveat I'm throwing in there is it doesn't mean you can completely throw away your brain. You'd be surprised by how many people I talk to that think, oh, I'm using MFA, I can't be phished. And that is not true on 90% of MFA solutions.
If anything, MFA makes it like even easier to phish someone because you would ask for their questions. That's like the first thing, make it look legit. And then finally, and I figured, I got him on this one. He's definitely going to agree with this. Training employees on cybersecurity risks. And I don't think we do enough of that, particularly if we're not keeping up with security. It almost feels like that could be a monthly thing, but give me your perspective.
It's hugely important. 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches happen because of social engineering and phishing, and people don't concentrate on that nearly enough. Trying to prevent social engineering and phishing is compromised in less than 5% of most people's IT security budgets, and it's kind of weird to have that type of only 5% when it's 70 to 90% of the problem. That's probably a huge misalignment in resources for what you're trying to tackle.
Gotcha. I wonder if we could gamify that, someday. Here's your, like I played this game the other day. My friend was like, I'm playing this game called Hacknet. And he's like, you got to download it. And so I did. It's kind of fun, but it was forcing people to sort of think. I could see gamifying security. Like, did you click on the email or didn't you, kind of making it
fun.
Yeah,
we certainly have that. We do those simulated phishing attacks. So you do training, then you do the simulated phishing attacks, and people see it as a game, and you'll be amazed at how many people go, hey, I caught your fake fish today. And you're like, that wasn't fake.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. So those were the things that we felt like were, I love that you went through these because it's hard. It's hard if you're a CISO. It's hard if you're a CTO or a CIO. You've got so many things, and on top of now work from home and everything else, this is great. So if I were to sum this up, and we'll sum it up at the end, but it's a lot of instruction and blocking and tackling again, like you talked about, less focusing on these sort of buzzword type things and more focusing on just good old fashioned blocking and tackling and training. All right, so let's move to the next slide. All right, so ransomware appears to be on the rise, Roger Grimes, from what I can tell. So this is a predicted, and I think you were looking at some numbers for where it actually is, which is actually much more than what we saw. And so this seems to be one of those examples of noise sort of becoming reality that you were talking about.
I think one of the biggest things is even the real numbers, these real numbers and the real numbers far exceed what was predicted. Like people thought we're going to get a handle of this, we're going to put it down. It is far worse and stealing more money and causing more, you're taking down entire cities, hospitals, police stations. Ransomware, I think easily next to nation states, but even ransomwares are taking advantage of nation state attacks. Huge problem, significantly impacting organizations in a way that other malware was never able to do.
All right, so and we're going to dig into that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this was an example. I used this one because this was real world. So I was on a call yesterday with a friend, and it's one that a lot of people on this call probably know, and I think you know him as well. It's Mike Lawson. He is the host of SEO Broadcast, and just an all-around fantastic person. And he mentioned that he's had to reschedule his physical or some doctor's appointment 2 or 3 times because some organization, which I don't know of in San Diego, called Scripps, CIRIPPS Health, has lost access to their electronic medical records. And as a result, real world, as you said, he can't go do this appointment. And can I assume surgeries and things aren't happening as well, Roger?
Yeah, absolutely. You do hear anecdotal stories of people that actually died because an ambulance couldn't get to them or they couldn't get through a traffic light. So there's actually real blood and death associated with it. And they try to say, oh, well, that person would have died anyways. Okay, didn't help. But you have, and when you have entire cities down, police departments, hospitals, you have cities. I know many, many cities in the U.S. that were down or not nearly as functional months and months later. I know companies that aren't 100% back a year later. And before, I can't think of an attack that made that sort of impact. We're in a new place, in a new space where they're actually going out of their way to attack the biggest places. And they can take them down. They're like, whatever we got to do to cause pain. And if they have to kill somebody, hey, that's just what they got to do.
And let's talk about that. So let's go back to the state acting in the 5th domain, which the 5th domain is the warfare now is the cyber. And it looks like we may have some questions, so I'll try to keep an eye on those. We have a Q&A here. There's somebody mentioning, Devin is mentioning the events in the Ireland medical community. I'm not aware of those. Are you, Roger?
Yeah, it was devastating to their healthcare. Yeah.
Wow. So let's take Stuxnet, for example. You were mentioning that. Well, before we get there, Kevin, so you're in California, right? Is this a big deal? Like, is Scripps like a CVS or something, or is it? I'm trying to figure out like what it's related to that I can sort of get my mind around. Is it Kaiser Permanente?
They're basically a healthcare provider, so they own hospitals in the San Diego area are Scripps hospitals. They're kind of like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, that type of organization focused in San Diego.
Okay, and so like a Kaiser Permanente more than a
similar, yes.
Yeah, than a CVS or a Walgreens or something. Okay.
Yep.
Oh wow, that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, that they're creating medical records on paper now. There's like they're going back 30, 40 years to doing what they were doing back then.
Wow. All right. So let's move on. I was going to discuss this, but I think this next one will kind of get us there. So, okay. It seems like, and here are the ones that when I look at this, here are the ones I remember. Misha was one, the Tesla Crip I remember, WannaCry, and then the big one that I hear about a lot is Not Petya, which I think we're going to cover in a little more detail. But I mean, what does this look like to you, Roger? It starts in 2015 and ends, in close to into 2020. Is this exceptional in terms of viruses or things like that from what you guys, have seen in the past? Or is it
I remember the first ransomware program, the AIDS Cop Trojan, they called it back in 1989. It was done by a William and Mary professor. He had the money being shipped to Panama. He got arrested, and he literally either played being crazy or he really was crazy. He was like wearing condoms on his nose and doing all kinds of paranoid stuff. But eventually he got help and stuff like that. And I think he got found innocent by reason of insanity, but they've been around. What has changed so much is that ransomware is now a tool of nation states and to attack and take out entire countries, entire companies. And they're not two kids in a basement. They are professional organizations with hundreds of employees and development teams with development, forks, PR teams, paychecks, the last ransomware that hit the U.S. pipeline. When the ransomware guy was talking, he was talking in language that almost any CEO would talk with. And I guess we're kind of
like a dude on like CNBC or something would talk. They sound like the Robinhood CEO kind of.
Yeah. And I forget, do we have a slide? I think we have a slide on that.
Yeah, we do. Let's head to the pipeline slide. We'll talk about that.
But there we go. Yeah. That was, he was talking with such sophistication that if you didn't know this guy was the head of a ransomware gang, you'd think, hey, I need to invest in this guy's company. He's like, listen, the problem we had is we run an affiliate program and we didn't have the controls in place that, we thought we had some controls, but obviously we need to update them because we had somebody that went beyond the parameters of what we thought our program was going to do. And, we're getting involved and we're going to try to refund. It was astounding to me to hear that. And he had a PR arm that was pushing out what their CEO was doing, and the communications that they were pushing out was like a regular CEO would have. And what you recognize is that is a regular organization, that they just happen to be in the business of doing ransomware. And this particular thing, it obviously got out of hand and governments got involved and all that sort of stuff. But these crimeware organizations are professional organizations. I've seen they have network diagrams. There's one guy that quit and he published his network diagram. And it was such a thing of beauty with the redundancy and, and across, we talk about being resilient. This guy had one of the most resilient network diagrams I ever saw in my life. And I thought that guy obviously is a highly trained network technician. That's a guy that could get a job at $200,000 or more anywhere at any major corporation. And what he decided to do was to work for a ransomware place.
Well, and I want to come back to this because my big question is, I look at this middle picture here. I see all this pipeline and I know a little bit about what the SCADA systems and whatnot, but I think everybody else is confused as to how did ransomware stop physical oil. But I want to come back to that. So let's go back a few slides. I want to walk through. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story, and then Roger will jump in and enhance it a bit. So to begin with, how do you get ransomware? And you're going to talk us through this. Go ahead.
Yeah, and this is a really good diagram. It's a slight bit what I'd say version 1 and version 2 of ransomware, but it's very, very much like this, that most people get infected because they're socially engineered into running some type of Trojan horse program. Sometimes it comes in via unpatched software. Sometimes it comes in because of password guessing or something like that. But typically, it mostly involves and then usually gets tricked into doing something. Immediately what happens is that first program that's downloaded is known as a stub loader file. And it goes in and infects the device that it's on, tries to make sure it can live through a reboot. Then it dials home to what's called the command and control servers, the CNC servers or C2 servers, and it gets its instructions. And those first set of instructions typically are download more malware, and it's all being updated. They actually, the ransomware gangs monitor the antivirus companies, oftentimes do a service called Google's Virus Total. If you go to virustotal.com, they have 73 antivirus engines. They'll monitor that to see if their malware is now being reported. And so they're constantly checking every 15 minutes to update their code, to re-sign it, to re-encrypt it, to obfuscate it, to change functions around so it continues to be unscannable. That's why the average organization has antivirus and firewalls, but they're not detecting these ransomware programs because they're constantly updating to stay ahead of them. And then so the first thing is dial home, and they'll not only download an updated copy of themselves, but they'll usually download 1 or 2 other programs completely unrelated, install them in different places. So if you clean up the original infection, you've still got 2 other programs that are somewhat unrelated but related installed there as well. They'll try to find all the passwords they can. Many times they implement either Mimikatz or the Trojan, what's the name? I forget the name. The TrickBot Trojan code. Get as many passwords, send that up there. The hacker gang kind of checks into the CNC server's admin console, and then they go explore them. They got a list of 10 to 1,000 victims that this thing's broken into, and they start exploring the networks and trying to find out what are the crown jewels. They start eavesdropping on email. They start exfiltrating data. They start exfiltrating company employee and customer passwords. They spend, again, the average dwell time, the average is 200 days. And I know many organizations that were compromised for over a year and some for years. And
what do you call it? Equifax was compromised for like 90 to 100 days before anything was out there, right?
I don't remember that. I do remember that, of course, they're compromised because of 2 unpatched servers, right? That had been patched for a couple of months.
Ransomware could get in that way as well, right? But let me ask a question. So what I'm struggling to understand, or I think my listeners or our viewers would struggle to understand is this infecting, is this like in the movies where, everybody comes in the morning, the call center comes in and everybody's PC boots up to a skull and crossbones, like, or is this hitting the servers and not the local machines, or some mix of that? Because I think you can sort of see it with a home PC, but I think people struggle with it in a corporate sense, particularly on how it could bring down the pipeline. Was that one PC? Was that 100, or these medical records?
Yeah, what's amazing about that one is that, so there are different types of ransomware, and the older versions, you execute them and they lock up what's on there. Version 2 kind of will start exploring the network and downloading passwords, service account passwords, network passwords, try to explore the network, and then they encrypt everything at will. Now what they do is the ransomware gang pops in and tries to figure out what assets they're actually not taking down everything usually. They're literally going, okay, this is the lifeblood of this organization. If I lock up these 80 servers, it's going to bring them to their knees.
Right. So they just look for top traffic and go, let's go get these things. Everybody's going to this.
Yeah, and even more so again about, their whole motivation is what do we have to do to cause the most pain that will cause them to pay us as soon. And I saw communications with they were interviewing a ransomware guy, and he was talking about all the new features they had and how they had competitors, and I think competition's good for the industry and all this stuff. But which is amazing to me. He's like, and so we're now adding this new service that says if we have to denial a service, attack them at the same time. So we take down their corporate infrastructure, but if they still have these, like banks, let's say banks and credit unions, you're not running your ATMs on the same network as your corporate network. Well, right. They're now thinking, hey, we're going to attack the other resources that we haven't been able to compromise. We're going to take you down. We are going to make you say uncle. Right. And even again with the corporate stuff, so on the personal ones, you got infected, you send them $300, whatever, they give you the decryption key to unlock it. In the corporate environment, there are a lot more. What they'll usually do is encrypt a couple of servers with one key, encrypt a whole bunch of servers with another key, and encrypt the rest of them with another key. They won't do it with one decryption key. And the reason why is they want the person will usually go, you got to prove to me you have a decryption key that will unlock it, and you will pay, instead of paying, maybe they're ultimately going to charge you $1 million. Well, for $10,000, they give you one key that unlocks one server. They prove that they're the ones that locked up your stuff and that this key works so you can decrypt that server. So they'll usually do multiple keys even within the same organization, but they'll be encrypted. If you find one PC being encrypted and you can turn off all your device and get off the network, you may prevent further damage, because it doesn't all happen at once.
Gotcha. So that's back to that blocking and tackling, the unpatched PC, the clicking on the wrong email. And I hesitate to ask this question, Roger, because I know the answer, but what happens when they stop having to pop in and they can turn loose some sort of AI to go find all this and do its work for them?
Yeah. I mean, so that's for sure the future of it. That is, the way that I foresee it is that they'll have this bot that's like, okay, that's a Windows machine. I need this code, upload this code. Okay, that's an Apple machine, upload this code. This is a Linux machine or a Unix server. And they are going to call on these new modules and they're like, oh, they've got this antivirus. This is what we need to disable the antivirus. Hey, they've got user account control enabled. We'll download. So they're going to be like a Metasploit on the fly.
Yeah, that's what
downloading the modules they need to spread.
In AI, we call that cascading classifiers, right? So, hey, these are all PCs, but then the next set is what kind of PCs, and then use different classifiers for that, and then go from there.
Yeah, not only that, but if you know what your intended, these days the skeleton frameworks are so sophisticated, you can literally in a GUI go, okay, I'm here, and I want to get there, and then the computer scans all the systems and figures out what compromises, what exploits to bring in to get you from there to there. I've seen it, and it literally takes 2 seconds, right? They're like, I'm here, I want to be there, go.
So I'm here, I'm on this call center person's PC, but I want to get to this ATM traffic I see going by, but there's firewalls and things in the way. Let me find my way.
Yeah, it starts asking, what are the group membership relationships? What are the ACLs that are allowed between the different places? What applications, what service accounts are being shared? Whatever it takes, and it's all automated. I've only seen what the good guys are making. I can't imagine what the bad guys are making.
Unbelievable. Let's move on to the next slide, because I want to talk through one of these that it blew my mind. It really did. So this was, you talking about, I think we talked about almost all of this just now. Public shaming, having a good backup saves you. This is really
just to remember that ransomware is no longer just about encrypting your data. They
Yep.
encrypt your data, plus they steal your data and say, if you don't pay us, we're going to release your data to the internet, to hackers, to your competitors. That is why most people are paying ransomware today, not because they're going to lock up their data. They steal every credential they can. They attack the employees. So they're in the company for 200 days. They're collecting when your employees are going on Amazon to buy something, going to the bank account, the 401k, the medical plans. They're getting all those login names and passwords. And they then tell the employee, hey, if you don't pay us, we're going to attack you and steal all your money or give all this information to hackers. So they're threatening your employees, and they're saying, by the way, we're only doing this because your employer wouldn't pay. Can you imagine? They cared so little about you and your data that they not only didn't protect you, but they refused to pay just a small part of their revenue. And so we're going to make your life a living hell because your employer didn't care enough to pay 2% of their net revenues.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you can get going, but just know that there's the 70, at least 70, and I think it's close to 80, 90% of ransomware today does data exfiltration and credential exfiltration and these other things before they ask for the ransom. So it's like when you tell them, I've got a good backup, they're like, I've heard this before. And they're like, now we asked you for 1 million. Now we want 3 million. I've seen that conversation many times.
We're gonna see that conversation. We're gonna see that in just a minute. So let's move on to the next one here. So this was Maersk, right? So this was interesting to me. This is one of the very first really big giant ones, right? So this is a company that is it's number 11 in the world brands, so it's something that's recognized. They're a shipping company, from what I understand. I don't know a ton about them, but and they operate all over the world. And one of the things that they do is they operate in the Ukraine. As we know, we've seen, unfortunately, the Ukraine, it seems to be a testing ground for state-sponsored attacks from Russia. I mean, allegedly, at least, as far as I know. And so, including taking their power grid down on Christmas Eve, which was crazy. But in this particular attack, they found the company, I think it's called Medox. Let's go to the next slide here. They found a company that is basically like the TurboTax of the Ukraine. Like everybody uses this particular software to do their taxes, their Ukraine taxes, because it's specialized. I think it's called Medox or something like that. And so they intended to unleash this thing in this ransomware. It's called non-Petya. There's another one was called Petya. So they must have said, hey, don't confuse us. We're not Petya, for whatever reason.
Branding is everything.
Branding is everything. And so Ukraine, this goes crazy. It stops transit. It stops basically the world stops in Ukraine. It's like a 9/11 event for the citizens there. If you read books on it, they'll say there was before and after non-Petya. That's where and they remember where they were, just like we remember on 9/11 where we were when that attack happened. But as a result of this, Maersk, who's a Denmark company who has nothing to really do with any of this, gets it. And they are such a big player in this. Well, first, they tell everybody that they have it. And what this results in is, like, apparently to get across a border, because these guys are driving stuff across the border every day, you got to have access to this custom stuff, and they lock that up. The system automatically locked that up. It locked everything up. I mean, it basically blew up Maersk to the point where you couldn't even get across a border because there were thousands of trucks backed up at borders. And what these guys did, and you had a little bit of visibility into this. You're going to talk about with the Coast Guard, but what these guys did was they flew and this is a huge company. It's like 40,000 people or something, but they flew every single IT person into Frankfurt, Germany. And they basically did the Apollo 11, right? Toss a bunch of stuff on the table and go, we got to make one of these. And all we have is this. We got to figure this out to get back online. But this affected them for like almost 3 or 4 weeks. And it stopped. Like I couldn't get parts from certain stuff. I mean, it had a long range effect. And you experienced it. Go ahead and talk about this.
I was consulting, presenting to the U.S. Coast Guard at the time, and
Melissa,
because of this,
next slide. Go ahead.
Yeah, they actually announced that any container ship coming into port had to clarify that they are free of ransom, really any malware, in control of their systems, because it turned out at the same time a Maersk ship got hit by ransomware. Its computers got taken out, and they had to wait outside. The Coast Guard flew people in a helicopter to help them. But that was the first time in maritime history where cybersecurity was now seen as critical to that ship being even allowed to come into port. And let me say, most maritime ships, horrible, horrible security, like no patching whatsoever.
Is that what happened with that Suez Canal? It was ransomware. They said we'll unblock it when you pay, and we just didn't know about it.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, but I still remember, the Coast Guard coming to grips with, hey, we have this new control that they have to sign on. There's not a lot of them. There's like 20 things, but this became the new one. That you have to certify that you don't have ransomware in your system before we're going to let you into our ports, because we need to know your control systems work. So that was an interesting development as a side impact of that.
And that certainly would have contributed to these damages, right? I mean, $10 billion in global damages from this ransomware. The cyber attack itself, just flying people around, restoring things, buying equipment, getting new lab, 300 to 350 million. It dropped their market cap. I mean, you can learn everything you need to learn by just looking at the chart and just watching it dump down, and never really recover back to where they were. So to your point, and these guys didn't even publish anything. So let's go on to this next one. This one was the one I was really interested in. I'll come back to this one. So this was the DC Metro Police, who we've heard a lot about lately because of the Capitol attacks. Apparently they broke in, and I didn't even know this happened. So apparently, and we're going to talk about this, they have some sort of like company that they hired in case this were to happen. And that company has a negotiator, like a hostage negotiator, like almost like the police force would have. And they're in some cyber security room negotiating with these guys. And basically, if we read this, it says, I believe the black is the police department's negotiator and the red is the hackers. It says, okay, we don't know about some user info, but whatever. And it looks like FBI 01. That's a great name. Those are not usernames I would go after at all. We've provided you requirements. Just do what we told you. Working on it. We'll be back to you. Any update? Well, we're going to give you, I think they wanted like 3 million. And they said, well, we'll give you 100,000. Then it seems like and if you don't take it, oh, well. And these guys said, okay, watch our website at midnight. And the first thing they did was they released the actual conversation, which is what we're looking at here, that took place on some secret dark web channel. This is not like in Skype or Telegram or Signal. This is on some secret chat room that they put up for these guys to talk, where you had to actually get on the dark web, run Tor, find some unique address. But they wound up releasing a bunch of stuff, right? I mean, this is still ongoing. You look at the date.
They released information on new candidates, but they released, all kinds of sensitive information, so security numbers, and enough that those guys' lives could be certainly harassed. And let me say, I've seen this a bunch of times where you had negotiators that are trying to talk tough and lowball them and stuff like that. I mean, it is many. I've seen companies' data erased forever. And I've had CISOs that I like and admire tell me, we didn't negotiate, we didn't give in, and they deleted all of our data. And I'm like, I think a year later, their bosses have buyer's remorse for being so tough. It's a business decision in most cases. And people go, well, if you pay the ransom, then it only encourages them. Yes, but even whether or not you pay the ransom, so many other people are, that it's your one holdup. Until you can get everybody agree not to pay, your holdout is not going to help that cause. So you're only hurting yourself. Although things are not perfect even when you pay the ransom, but I don't know anybody that didn't recover far faster paying the ransom than not paying the ransom.
But Reagan said we don't negotiate. Was it Reagan? We don't negotiate with terror. That's like an American, we have it on shirts and stuff and cups. And
yeah, I love where they're like, the FBI says, a lot of people, the FBI says not to negotiate, not to pay the ransom. That is not true. I've been in the room with them. They say it's a business decision. It's up to you. And number two, there's like literally a book by the famous FBI negotiator called Never Split the Difference. And that whole book is just about the FBI paying ransom.
Interesting. So let's go back one. So before we get to the next round of this, so go back one. I think it's okay, Roger, tell me how this pipeline, how it is that ransomware, suddenly, look at the shortages. And I understand the panic. I'll speak to that. Like, you had shortages in Florida. There was an overspill of, oh my God, no more gas, and people just went and started collecting it. But how did it legit, stop this? How did this stop this pipeline from working? It just seems like, couldn't you manually go out there and twist the knob? I mean,
it just hit their corporate network, and then everybody said, hey, we don't know how far this is. We have to assess what the damage is. Is it safe? And then, so I can understand that. But then what was weird is I live in Florida. We had gas shortages because everybody panicked buying. And let me say, when the TVs go, now everybody don't panic buying gas. That's the first time I ever thought about going out to get gas. And I should have, because by the next morning, all the gas was gone. I actually had to tell my work, even though I was going back in after COVID, I can't come in because I don't have enough gas. And I had to wait days till we got gas. And in Florida, only the top part of Florida is even impacted by the gas. But they were going over and over again saying, we're fine. We get our gas from ships. We're not impacted by this at all. It still didn't matter. We were without gas for about a week where you weren't sure if your gas station was going to have gas. But even I had a coworker of mine that works in the Netherlands. They had gas shortages because of our pipeline issue, because of ships being rerouted, to provide gas to these states. So that was all because the corporate network got taken down and it didn't impact. That's just, there's always more impacts than you think.
So this is where they went in. They found, hey, these systems control the flow of the gas. We can take them over and shut them down, and they're crippled.
Yeah, and they paid the ransom.
Yeah. How much was it? It
was like, I think 4 to 5 million. I've seen, things in there. Which is amazing is that we hear about.
How do you get 4 to 5 million of Bitcoin suddenly? That's another issue.
The negotiators have it. I mean, if you're dealing with a professional, those professionals, and it's not always Bitcoin, but many times it is. But your negotiator has a
4.5 million set up. Dogecoin, is that the plan?
yeah, really. Yeah, I'm going to offset my potential cost by investing early in Dogecoin.
Maybe I could pay them in ASS coin, which is a legit coin that just went up by 60%. Okay, so let's keep going because we're running short on time and you have so much to say. So let's move on to the next slide here. Next one after this. Okay, this blew my mind. So even if I pay, I'm really just paying for them not to release everything. I'm still not going to get all my data back. Only 8%?
Yeah, that's amazing. Most of it is you get the keys and it unlocks the data, but it turns out ransomware doesn't make sure that when it encrypts stuff that it does it in a way that's easy to restore, right? Because when you have DNS that impacts Active Directory, which impacts your front end, your middleware, and your back end servers, and they're all out of sync. Plus it just literally takes time to restore. Yeah, I got to say, this was amazing to me that it was this high. But this is what I will say is that everybody I know that paid the ransom still felt like they got back online sooner. Although it always takes this big leap of faith where you got to go, okay, I'm also going to trust them not to have compromised my other systems, not to have backdoors. Like, the reality is
hire them to restore. You could go, hey, I'll give you an extra $1 million if you put everything back the way it was.
Yeah, really. And I do know many people that said, well, we're not going to pay the ransom and we're just going to restore. They found out restoring 8,000 devices was going to take 5 years or something like that. Like
Aramco.
Yeah. And let me say again, many companies a year later still will not fully restore it. That's an amazing thing. That when we had email worms and stuff like that in the past, we were down for a couple of days to maybe a week. But you're talking about the average victim, even if they pay the ransom, is going to be down a week to weeks. And if you don't pay the ransom, it's months to a year.
Crazy. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. We've only got 9 minutes. I'm going to have to skip some of this. We'll come back to it. We'll publish this, but let's go to the next slide because this was the other thing that worried me that you said. All of a sudden, these insurance guys, they're getting hit so much that you're saying that, hey, they're going out of business. They're struggling to stay intact.
Yeah. So I was I was on an insurance consortium presentation. I was the only non-insurance person there. And I couldn't believe kind of the sense of panic within not only all the people there, but all the people looking to guidance. And what it turns out is, used to be if you're in cybersecurity insurance, it was easy money. They kept 60 cents of every dollar in premiums. It's now much, after you can only pay so many $1 and $3 million ransoms, or it's not, we're now talking billions. Now we're talking real money. So if you go to renegotiate, if you didn't have a policy, you're going to renegotiate it, it's going to be a much higher premium. It's going to be significantly less coverage. I know people that had 5, 10, and $50 million of coverage. The max you'll get is 5 million. Most people will not get more than 100,000, which is amazing. There's going to be more outs. They're more likely to have clauses saying if it's because of ransomware or criminal activity, we're not going to cover you, or we're going to cover you at far less. And they're also going to, it used to be, I love the saying, this insurance consortium person that sells insurance for a living, she said, it used to be in the good days, we'd send the person asking to be insured a 5-question quiz, and 3 of those questions were name, address, and phone number. But, because they were just making so much money, hand over fist. Now it's hundreds of questions. They're really trying to find out if you're secure or not. They're even doing vulnerability scans on you, and if you have a vulnerability they find, they're not covering you. And if you're insured and they scan and find out that you have a vulnerability, you only have a certain amount of days to fix it before they yank your policy. And they're actually, the insurance industry, the most progressive ones, are actually becoming managed security service providers now. They're actually starting to go, hey, we'll scan you, we'll patch you, we'll read your logs. We will give you a risk rating at the beginning, then we'll give you a policy, and then we'll keep you secure during the middle of it. Like, why go somewhere else? We can be your risk management as a service vendor. It's just, it's an amazing
And
change.
you were saying too that like the bad guys will go find this insurance on the network. So they'll find the document. So they'll try to get into, let's say you have a document storage system where you keep your insurance docs or whatever, and they'll read through it so they know exactly how much they can ask for.
Yeah, they're specific. It's happened many, many times where the negotiator will go, hey, we can't afford to pay that. We can only pay $100,000. And then the transcript of the ransomware guy is like, hey, we've seen your insurance policy. We see you're covered for $3 million. So we're going to ask for $3 million. Not only that, but they have targeted multiple cybersecurity insurance agencies, compromised their customer list to learn who to attack and what amounts to ask for. And
so
they
like
even
buying the insurance makes you a target.
Yeah. Like they use the cybersecurity insurance as a shopping list. And then one of the cybersecurity insurance places that was compromised said, well, we're not going to pay the ransom ever. We're going to just tell people not to pay the ransom. That was the response, trying to cut down having to pay out millions of things. The ransomware industry or the ransomware guys went in there and cut that company down, encrypted all of their data, stole all their data, encrypted their data, and didn't give them a chance for the keys. It was kind of like, this is what happens to people that don't play our game.
Wow. So let's move to the next slide here. So we just mentioned this. Let's keep going. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes. Backups.
Still good. Backups are still good.
Yes. But they need to be secured offline as well, and they have to be determined to the dependencies. That's the big problem. Is the fire drills that we do are to restore one system, not all the systems. And which ones do you bring up first, and what are the dependencies? We'll go to the next slide because I'm just trying to keep us on time here. This is really the actual NIST guidance on this, and they do have a very specific guidance around safe harbor, around air gapping. But as Roger will point out, when you run your drills, don't just run one system. You got to run several at once, because do you have the resources to do that? And what order do you do it? How would you bring everything back up? And that's what Maersk faced. And that's why they had to bring all those people to one place in that space. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next slide here. Top 5 defenses. Let's take this last minute.
So, yeah, real quick. Focus on social engineering. It's 70 to 90% of most people's risk. Patch your internet accessible software. That's 20 to 40% of why people are compromised. After that, it's the attackers are going to try to compromise your passwords and do password guessing. So try to use multi-factor authentication where you can. If you use passwords, make them non-guessable. Make sure they're different passwords for every site and service, so that if one site or service gets compromised, it can't be leveraged to more easily attack other sites. Teach you and yourself and your end users how to spot rogue URLs. I got some links there. But when you're being phished and social engineered, a lot of that includes these bogus links. I see them all the time. And the better you and your coworkers understand what a real one looks like, is it really coming from Microsoft versus trying to pretend to be from Microsoft, better off you're going to be. And use least permissive permissions. Another big one is a lot of these overly permissive permissions, both locally on the desktop. Everybody's logged in as admin or root all the time and doing things, or your Amazon AWS storage storage buckets are overly permissioned, and now everybody can read this database. All they had to do was look for it, and they found it, and now they can read it. So that's there. There's a million things you can do. These are the top 5 things you can do that will significantly reduce your cybersecurity risk.
Speaking of those top 5 things, if we go to the next slide, a great book to read is your Data-Driven Computer Defense, because it really talks about all of these things.
Yeah.
And you've agreed to give away a few. So Melissa's going to put her email, and the first, how many did you have?
4.
4. The first 4 people to email Melissa in order will get a signed copy. It'll take us a couple weeks, but we'll get it out. She just put her email in there. So if you email, you'll get a signed copy of that. I can tell you it's a fantastic book, and probably our next webinar at some point is going to be to talk about, I love talking about this with you, but cryptography apocalypse around quantum. You're one of the foremost security related quantum experts on the planet. There aren't a lot of you around, and I've been following this, since 2019 with you. And I'm excited. This book is fantastic. Anybody can read it. You don't have to be a quantum mechanics major. I highly recommend that you read it, because this is a coming game changer, as well as a lot of his other books. There's so many, Hack the Hacker, so much stuff that Roger has. And he's so nice to give us his time and to spend time going through this. But I cannot strongly recommend these 2 books enough, that if you're in any kind of management at a credit union or a financial institution, these are must reads for you and your staff, to look at. So with that in mind, Roger, let's go to the next slide. Roger, if someone wants to find you, it looks like we've got the stuff on the screen here. I know you help a lot of folks. You are just like, anytime I've ever called you, you've just been wonderful to help.
Yep.
Tell us what Know Before does, and why credit unions might want to engage, and what should, when they reach out to you on Twitter, what your favorite color is. I don't know.
Yeah. You can email me directly at rogerg@knowbefore.com. If you email me, I promise I'll respond within 24 hours. rogerg@knowbefore.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Know Before, we're the world's #1 security awareness training vendor. We help people to teach their employees about computer security awareness, and do simulated phishing tests to see how well they follow that advice, and if they fail, to get more training. And we do it better than anybody else. So I'm pretty excited to work for them.
And as for Big, we work with Roger to clean up behind him on home banking systems and other stuff. We like to lock things down, and you can find me on Twitter. You can go to our website. We hope you got something out of this today. I recognize there were a couple things we went a little more speedy over. Maybe Roger, you and I will take a minute and add to this recording maybe a little later, just those sections, and we will be posting this as a recording so you can request it. Let's see if we had any more questions just before we go. Actually, that's just Melissa posting her email. And with that in mind, Roger, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great sunny day in Florida. Go get some gas. And I don't even want to ask you what happens when the same ransomware guys hit the power grid like we saw in Texas, but that can be a whole nother conversation. As a matter of fact, you got to come on the podcast. That's where we should cover the rest of this.
Yeah, I was going to get an EV vehicle because we ran out of gas, but I think, what if they take out the power infrastructure? I need a, hydrogen car or something like that.
You need a bicycle. You need a bike is what you need.
Yep.
That will, an EMP will not take out the bike. And so I think you're good. We didn't even get the EMPs.
That's right. Well, thanks. It's always great talking to you, John. You're a plethora of good information. So thanks. Appreciate that.
I always learn. I learned so much today. So thank you. And thanks everyone for attending. Take care.